Mr. President, this afternoon there's going to be a vote on the Senate floor which is of historic importance. It's rare that I use those words to describe what is going on in the Senate chamber. It's equally rare for us to actually take up an issue and debate it in this chamber. But this afternoon will be a critical vote. We'll face a critical vote. I can recall, as most members can, many votes that they've cast in the course of service in Congress, both the House and the Senate. But the votes that cause lost sleep and worry, time and again, are votes involving war. You see, part of my responsibility in the Senate, shared by my colleagues under Article 1, Section 8, is to actually vote to decide whether the United States of America shall go to war. The Founding Fathers were explicit. They wanted to give to Congress that responsibility so members of Congress could represent their constituents, House districts and states that we all represent. And that created an opportunity, in fact, I think an obligation, for us to really measure this grievous, important, historic decision against the feelings of the families who would be asked to support a war with their tax dollars or with the lives of people that they love. I can recall back in 2001 what occurred on 9/11. Those of us alive on that date will never forget it. But I also recall that a year later, we faced a decision right here in the Senate chamber about whether, as a result of 9/11, we would go to war against Iraq and Afghanistan. There was a long debate about whether we should invade Iraq. If you'll remember, the leaders in the government told us there were weapons of mass destruction which threatened the region and the world, including the United States. And if we didn't move into Iraq and take out Saddam Hussein in his capacity, we would leave the United States in danger. The debate went on for a long period of time, and the final vote was cast in the early morning hours in October of 2002. I remember it well. And for reasons I can't explain, I stayed on the floor after the vote. There were only 2 or 3 members of the Senate still here. It was one of those moments where we had voted to go to war and weren't certain about what the next step would be. 23 of us, 1 Republican and 22 Democrats, voted against the invasion of Iraq. I think it was one of the most important votes I ever cast. The representations about weapons of mass destruction turned out to be false. We had no intelligence to back up that assertion, and that was the reason why we were off to war. Well, here we are some 16 years later, still engaged in a war in Iraq. I don't believe there's a single member of the Senate that night that cast a vote for the invasion of that country who believed that 16 years later we would still be engaged in a war in Iraq. Subsequently, there was a vote on the invasion of Afghanistan. It was a different circumstance. We believed that Afghanistan had literally been the sourcing point for the terrorists who struck us on 9/11 and killed 3,000 innocent Americans. And the argument made by the administration is no one can do that to the United States of America without paying a price. And I joined the overwhelming bipartisan majority supporting the invasion of Afghanistan to go after Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. A vote against invading Iraq, a vote for the invasion of Afghanistan. But I can tell you, I would never, ever been able to stand here and say with any certainty that 16 years later we would still be engaged in a war in Afghanistan. But we are. The obvious question to ask is, in 16 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places in the world, how many other times has the United States and the House of Representatives come together to debate the wisdom of a decision about continuing a war or declaring a war? And the answer is none, not once. For 16 years, we have been observers and bystanders through presidents of both political parties, and the Congress has stood by and observed military action being taken all over the world. Brown University did a survey of what they called Costs of War Project and recently published data saying that the United States fought terror in 76 countries between October 2015 and October 2017, using its own troops and bases through training of host country counterterrorism forces or through drone and air strikes 76 different countries we are engaged in military operations. How often has the Senate or the House come together to debate the wisdom or to even question whether those military actions were authorized? I think none. Perhaps someone could point to one, but I can't think of one time we've done it. This afternoon is going to be different because we are being asked as members of the Senate whether we're going to exercise our constitutional authority and responsibility when it comes to an ongoing war in a country that most Americans couldn't find on the map, the country of Yemen. Yemen now is embroiled in a civil war and an invasion by Saudi Arabia, and we are part of that military operation. There's been no vote in the United States Senate on those military activities. There is a loose connection to Al-Qaeda, which was referenced in the invasion of Afghanistan as a rationalization for going after this terrorist operation now being found in Yemen. But there's more to that war in Yemen than just the presence of Al-Qaeda. There is an ongoing surrogate battle between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and the United States is engaged. I believe we are engaged because of our friendship with Saudi Arabia. Some have argued because we sold them the planes that we are now refueling. At the very least, we ought to bring this case to the American people. That is our constitutional responsibility. And that's why this vote this afternoon is important. Because we took an oath, each of us, when we became senators, to uphold the Constitution of the United States against enemies foreign and domestic. And that Constitution says that the people of the United States, the ones I represent in Illinois, the ones that are represented in Oregon or in Texas, are going to have a voice in this decision through us, through our debate, through our decision. I thank the senators that brought this matter to the floor today. Senator Lee, a Republican senator from the state of Utah, Senator Sanders, Democratic senator from Vermont, Senator Murphy, another Democratic senator from Connecticut. I've joined in co-sponsoring this effort. It really is going to put us to a test to justify what we are doing in Yemen today. Because what is happening in Yemen has been characterized by the United Nations as the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. And that's saying something. Some 8 million people are dying of famine in Yemen because of this war. Some 16 million are in desperate need of humanitarian assistance immediately. This is no skirmish. This is no just exchange of fire. This is carnage and destruction, the likes of which the world has never seen. And we are part of it. If we are part of it and should be part of it, then we should make that decision as a Senate and a House of Representatives as the Constitution requires. But going to the bleachers, standing by the sidelines, and watching more and more military operations take place around the world without asserting our constitutional responsibility is a mistake. That's why I've co-sponsored this measure this afternoon and look forward to voting for it to move forward. Mr. President, I yield the floor.